And they were like, you have another sister that you don't know about. You have a secret sister.
I've been dressed in pink leotards and a diaper doing 30 singing telegrams in February in Chicago.
The only person who was there was John Houseman, who was the founder of the school.
And now you're a Disney princess, is that right? Am I phrasing that correctly?
That's absolutely right. And that's another wish I had. So the universe, gives you what you want in mysterious ways.
Love, love, love. Oh, love wins, love wins. No, because love is conditional. Because love is based on the contingency that you can accept that person for whoever. It's about forgiveness.
Right.
That's what America needs to find.
Yeah.
It ain't love.
Because I don't know if you know this, but I think very few of us in the world have found a dead body.
Probably not, and probably not under the circumstances that I found it.
Sure. So what was the deal?
Join us for all this and more on At the Elephants with Rob Morris, available now on YouTube and iTunes podcasts. Share, like, subscribe, now. Come on, get to it. Do it, you want to.
I better get used to
Hello, everybody, and welcome to At the Elephants. I'm your host, Rob Morris, and what a show. What a show for you today. Mary IRWIN, it's going to be great. She's an incredible individual, and we had a really great conversation. We discussed, I'll go ahead and tell you the big announcement is that she is currently in the middle of her last full-time year teaching at school. I'll let her explain it better for you in just a couple of moments. What else? Still having trouble with the iTunes feed for some reason. So YouTube is the way to hear this, unfortunately, just for right now until we can get that back up. Those of you who are tuning in to hear this episode, please go back and check out the other episodes if you haven't seen them already. Dave Thomas Brown and I just had a great chat. Joe Mills, Dean Wilcox, Bob Francisconi, Greg Walter, Robbie Lutfi, Jacoby Howard. Had some fantastic guests already this season, and there's a lot more to come. So enjoy this conversation that I had with Mary. With that being said, let's get right to it. So where are you from, Mary?
Where am I from? I grew up in a town called Montvale, New Jersey, which is northern New Jersey, very suburban, about 35 miles northwest of New York City. The interesting thing, though, about my childhood was that even though I grew up in New Jersey, my parents were Texans.
Interesting.
So, they were transplants.
So what brought them from Texas? They both lived in Texas, knew each other.
They grew up in Texas. Well, they didn't know each other there. They met in their 20s, pre-World War II. Mm-hmm. My mother was teaching school, shockingly, and my father was actually working on oil rigs in the Gulf of Mexico.
Gotcha.
And my mother was teaching school in a tiny little town called Grapeland in Texas. And
where is that?
All of this happened in sort of central and east Texas.
Gotcha. In between San Antonio and Houston-ish, along the coast?
No. Central more. My mother grew up in Dawson, which is nearer to Waco,
right,
which some people call Wacko.
Sure.
Which I will get in trouble for saying. But no, more East Tech, closer to Louisiana,
sure,
kind of that area.
Yeah.
And then down into the Houston area, but not as far west as San Antonio.
Gotcha.
So my dad was there on leave from the offshore oil rig, and they met, and they dated, and then they wrote letters all during World War II, and sort of delayed their marriage. They were finally married in 1947, and then my father had been in the Army Corps of Engineers during World War II, and basically became an engineer and got a job at a place in Rockland County, which is New York State, just over the border from where I grew up. And so he and my mother went up there shortly after they were married in 1947, and my brother and I came along some years later.
Now, when I moved to New York in high school from Texas, which was really the first time I had spent any significant time aware there, it was so strange being from Texas in New York and in that region.
Yeah.
What was it like to be a first generation immigrant from Texas?
It was interesting because, of course, I'm not a Texan. I'm a child of Texans.
Sure.
And
second generation immigrant.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Well, first generation, you were right before. The neighborhood where we grew up, this was in the 50s and early 60s, and there had been a mass exodus from New York City. And so I grew up with a lot of kids whose families were, who were maybe second generation Italian, Irish, Polish, sort of all kinds of things. And I remember one day in high school, my friend Julie thought it was hilarious, and a bunch of us were standing around, and the game was, "What are you?" "What are you? Where?" And they got to me, and I was kind of like, "Well, I don't know what I am." And Julie said, "You're Texan," and so in a weird way, there were. A lot of kids went home to a culture that existed in the home that didn't necessarily exist in the wider world.
Right.
But I will say that a lot of my friends were and this is a story that I've told in class a lot of my friends were very charmed by my mother's Southern accent, and my father completely unconsciously toned his way down because he was in business.
Right.
And there was a lot.
Was that the first time you noticed somebody doing that? Because that's a big part of what you talk about.
Yeah, I probably.
First time that you. When do you think you realized that that had happened? You probably didn't.
I realized it. No, I remember exactly when I realized it. I think I was about 10 or 12 years old, and my father had a younger brother who was 10 years younger. But they looked very much alike. They were both 6'4", and my Uncle Bill sounded exactly like my father, except with a really strong Texas accent. And so when I heard them together on a summer visit, at first I thought my dad had, stayed in New York working, and we were down visiting family. And I heard my uncle when I was still asleep in the morning, and I thought my father had arrived. And I leapt out of bed and ran out into the living room, and was disappointed to see that it was my uncle because the timbre of their voices and everything was so similar. So it was that summer that I realized.
And he speaks differently for work.
Yep.
And that's got to be what it is.
Yep.
Do you speak the same way that you spoke when you were growing up? Has your voice changed for work?
Well, yeah. I mean, yeah. My voice changes all the time for work, and in response to whatever the need is or whatever the project is.
You told me once, I think, in class that you had a pretty strong accent when you were younger.
I didn't have a really strong Jersey accent.
You didn't have the Jersey thing?
I mean, I had some, and I still have some, but it was never very strong. But it was there. It was there, and it still is there. And, I love it. If I fly into Newark Airport and I start to hear things on the loudspeakers, I smile.
Right. Absolutely. So, what'd you do for fun when you were younger? That's something I've always wondered about you. Just in your spare time. It was something I asked Bob recently, and I never really asked anybody that question before. But it occurred to me, I was like, I spent so much time playing with Bob. So I was like, what did you do when you were a little kid, when you just went out and played?
That's a great question. What did Bob do for fun when he was younger?
Oh, well,
I didn't listen to your interview with him.
Well, you can listen to it, but among other things, he would go fishing and find dead bodies and all sorts of crazy stuff. Yeah. It was pretty nuts.
That's an interesting story, I'm sure.
Yeah, he'll tell you.
What did I do? Well, when I was little, again, in this neighborhood that I grew up in, there were just, and this is post-World War II, baby boom was in full swing. There were a ton of kids, and there weren't fences and there weren't shrubs between most of the yards, and we would just run and play. I remember we used to play capture the flag across 3 yards, and I remember being outside a lot. I remember loving to do things like, I suppose, I don't know, is this mildly cruel, put lightning bugs in jars in the summer?
No, I think that's fairly innocent. You also get the curve of the time frame.
Yeah,
we're
that's
a little
right.
more
That's
reasonable
right.
about that.
And I don't know. I remember the area was a lot less built up, so I remember that we would just kind of run around and ride our bikes, and there was a lot of, and this is something that does make me sad for kids now. There was a lot of unsupervised, free, outdoor, imaginative play.
I remember a good deal of that, and I
Yeah.
think I'm at the very tail end of that experience.
When people still felt like that was safe. And,
Yeah, because I feel like by the time I was in high school, I looked down and kids weren't doing that
Right.
anymore. But when I was younger, there was a lot of, that was still like landlines and internet was rare, and it was at the tail end of that.
Exactly.
But I do think, that's a very specific experience that a lot of kids might be missing out on.
Yeah.
For sure. What do you think what do you think it is that takes away from us when we don't have that? What do we get from that experience of being just out in the world, letting our minds go?
I think two things. Yeah, that's one. I think letting our minds go and nourishment of the imagination.
Right.
And I also think self-reliance.
Yeah. Learn how to take care of yourself a little bit.
And like everybody's, I don't know. I remember that we were all called home in different ways. My mother had a bell.
Oh, nice.
Some people's mothers would whistle, and some people would just get out on the porch and yell for their kids.
Right.
And my brother and I would, we'd go outside for a couple hours, and when we heard the bell, we would go home.
Right.
And yeah, so there was a freedom in that I think was very good for me.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Oh, so just one brother?
Yep, one brother, 2 years older. Yep.
What does he do?
My brother and I sort of split the world in half. My brother is a computer engineer. He designs programs for Boeing, which he's done for 30 some odd years. He writes code. He does all kinds of things I can't even begin to understand. And I do all kinds of things he can't even begin to understand.
Right. That works out.
So, yeah.
You close?
In a way.
Which
Yeah.
way?
No, I mean,
If you don't mind me asking.
only because our worlds are very different.
Of course.
But yeah, I
You
mean,
see each other holidays?
we
or
see each other not
every few
necessarily
years?
holidays because it's more like we kind of, and since our parents have died, we make an effort to make sure that we spend some time together once a year. And I have 2 nephews.
That's great.
Who are both grown, and and so, but we do have to, because this is a big country as
Right.
opposed to my husband's country. We have to make an effort to see each other, but we do.
Right. That's good.
Yeah.
How long's that been now?
Since I saw my brother, actually, my brother and my oldest nephew were here for fall break, so it's been a few weeks.
Oh, that's great.
Yeah.
That's wonderful.
Yeah.
So, you mentioned your husband, this guy. What's his name?
What's his name? Ben.
Ben something?
Ben Fury, yes.
Wonderful.
Yeah. My
So,
wonderful, brilliant husband.
so where'd you meet Ben?
I met Ben in graduate school in London at the Central School of Speech and Drama, as it was then. And just like NCSA became UNCSA, the Central School of Speech and Drama has since become the Royal Central School of Speech and Drama. So we got a U, we got an R
Sure.
to go in front of, yeah. Yes.
I gotta say, what a drag in comparison. University does not sound as nice as
Quite
Royal.
as snazzy as Royal.
It really
yeah.
is flashy.
But it's the same kind of thing, you know.
I
it's
don't
an
think we would have
elevation
fought it so
instead.
much if it had been Royal North Carolina School of the Arts.
Funny.
Maybe that would have been more accepted.
Could have.
So, you met in grad school, and how long before you didn't meet and immediately get married?
No, indeed. We met.
Some people do that.
That's true.
But
that's
as I
true.
understand it,
no,
that's
we
not
did
your
not
story.
Do that. We did not do that. We met in 1994, and we got married in the summer of 1998.
Oh, gotcha.
Yeah.
Were you here yet when you got married? Or
Oh, yeah. Oh, absolutely. I was fortunate enough, Barney Hammond, who's now has come back to Winston-Salem and is doing some work again with fourth years, was the head of voice and speech at the time and had done the voice studies course at Central some years earlier. And when they started looking for somebody, Barney got in touch with David Carey, who was the head of the voice course when Ben and I were students. And long story short, Barney kind of headhunted me and brought me here, and I interviewed for the position, and so I was fortunate enough to have a job before I finished grad school waiting for me.
Nice.
Which was really nice, yeah.
And you've had that job or some
version of
that
job. Some evolution is a good word for this is 21 years.
Wow, that's fantastic.
Just terrifying.
Yeah, it's terrifying, but it's also just pretty damn impressive.
Huh.
I gotta say that because I feel like especially, I mean, the teachers at this school across the board, you have to have a working artist in you. You can't just be a teacher to teach you.
Right.
So of someone like you, and then even someone like Bob, who has clearly that inside of them and is always there, to stay at a place for so long, there has to be something absolutely magnetic.
Well, it's interesting. I remember when I first came here, people said to me, people don't leave School of the Arts. And I thought, that's interesting, I'll see. And when Barney got in touch with me, I had heard of the school. I didn't know that much about it. I knew that it had a good reputation, but I didn't know that much about it. And in my thought, because, Ben was far away, he was going to go and teach in Dublin. We weren't sure what was going to happen. I thought, well, maybe I'll stay there 4 or 5 years. So, Gerald was here. I was the first full-time faculty member that Gerald hired.
How long had he been here? 3 or 4 years?
At that point, something like that. I'm not sure exactly the number of years, but it was something like, I think 3 years. I think maybe that Robert would know that, of course, much better than I because it was his life. But and so, working with Gerald, working with the rest of the faculty, and working with the quality of students that you all are, it gets in your blood, and so
certainly
it makes one want to stay.
Yeah.
And Ben and I were lucky that things worked out so that he was able to be here for 9 years, and now, of course, he's been doing a lot more freelance work.
All over the place.
But mostly now in New York.
Right.
And so what that means is 21 years is going to be, this will be my last full-time year.
This is going to be your last year at the school.
My last full-time year.
As a full-time teacher.
Yep.
And then, so what does that mean then?
And then what that means is I used Kristen Linklater as my model for what would happen. Yeah, what a terrible model. Mentor,
set your
role
standards
model.
Somewhere, Mary.
When Kristen was sort of phasing out of Columbia, she was there for 1 semester a year for 4 or 5 years, and so that's what Carl and I have been talking about, and that's hopefully what the plan will be. I'll be here in the fall, And I'm just going to teach Shakespeare to the third years.
So which classes, to catch everybody up, does that mean you're not going to be teaching
So it
any
means I
longer?
won't do the second year Linklater voice class, and we haven't worked out exactly what's going to happen to that, but we're in the process of figuring that out.
Of course.
And the fourth year warm up class may go the way of all things, and and all the administrative stuff I will pass on to others.
So where, I mean, I don't think any decision like this is ever simple or comes from one place, but, I mean, can you speak to where it comes from, other than just 21 being a lucky number?
No, it comes from two things. Ben and I have been dealing with long distance again for 5 years, and we're very tired of it.
I can understand
And we're not willing to do it anymore.
Sure.
And that's the primary reason.
Right.
And also, though, to be completely honest, I'm getting older, and the amount of work and the numbers of hours gets on top of me more than it used to. So that's where it comes from.
Absolutely no shame in that. I can't understand how the teachers, especially those of us who were here, you know, in the last few years and really in the tail end of everything that Gerald put together in his time here, the 14-hour days that you guys do. I mean, you and Molly and Bob and Matt and these people have been here forever. It's like, how were, you know, we were in
not quite forever, but nonetheless.
You know what I mean. In comparison to our short time here, it feels like, you know, you go and you do your Bob class 2 days a week, and he does 2 a day.
Exactly.
And, you know, that volume, just to think about. Now, to be fair, when he's not doing a show, he doesn't eventually get to go home. But, you know, it's just insane. And to think of you doing it for as long as you've done it, what do you think it is that keeps you going when it's...
it's I was actually talking about this with somebody earlier. The work is healing, and the work is energizing. I've felt that way about Linklater voice work since I encountered it in my 20s.
Mm-hmm.
It is inspiring, and it is physically healing, and incredibly engaging, and I feel very used and challenged creatively when I am in the middle of a Shakespeare class or figuring out a problem in a rehearsal. So it's you know, it sounds like a hokey word, but I can't think of a better one. But it is very rewarding, and it's a different kind of creative fulfillment than acting. It's sort of the same, only different.
Absolutely.
And, yeah.
I feel like, and I'm not as familiar with your earlier time here because, you know, I wasn't here and stuff.
Indeed.
But I've seen you doing some more acting in the last few years, and you've directed recently. And is that a newer thing for you?
Well, the directing was Carl's idea, at which he... you know, and I was very reluctant about. He thought it would be a good plan, and I have to say that he was right. That he, by challenging me with that Carol Churchill piece, and you know, giving me the lovely Elizabeth Lale and Miles Duffield to work with, who, you know, both so wonderful and open as actors. You know, I always used to say that I was the only person in the theater who didn't secretly want to be a director, and so I enjoyed
now you've
it.
been outed as not that person.
I enjoyed it more than I thought I would. And then last year, I did the Love's Labour's piece, the second year Shakespeare with the second year students who were in Guys and Dolls, and I had a good time doing that as well. I don't think that that's something that I'll continue to pursue, though. But he was right to push me in that direction and to challenge me.
Grateful
and
for the experience.
Yeah, absolutely. More acting, though, again, is definitely part of. I want in this next phase of my life to have a better work-life balance.
It's great when I don't have to ask the next question that's in my head and you just start talking about it.
And I just knew what it was. Yeah.
You go ahead.
Yeah. I do that sometimes. It's to have a better work-life balance, and as I was saying, teaching and coaching are incredibly creative activities for me and very satisfying, and I love working with and helping to grow all of you gifted students, and there's a whole different set of creative challenges and satisfactions that are involved for me as an actor when I get to go back and act some more.
Right.
So.
Do you have particular things that you'd be interested in, or is that really kind of a too far in the future to think about thing?
I would love, there's some Shakespeare characters that I'm still interested in playing. I would love to play Amelia in Othello. There are a lot that I'm too old to play now. Oh well, that's okay. There's still plenty, so many. And in terms of other material, just things that are interesting and chewy and yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
What's Ben up to?
Right now?
Yeah.
Let's see. Ben is actually back teaching this fall at Juilliard. And he's enjoying that. That's the first time in 4 or 5 years that he's been doing any teaching at a school.
Wow.
He's still working on The Curious Incident of the Dog in the Nighttime. And
don't we know somebody
in
that?
We do know somebody in that, and it's really quite lovely that Ben and Tyler Lee are working together again. Mm-hmm. And he's also just finished working with Lucas Hall, because Lucas is one of the understudies in Charles III.
Great.
Which has come over from England, and Ben is doing dialect coaching for the American understudies because they've brought the British company over. He just finished Cloud 9 at the Atlantic Theatre Company, and he's about to go down to Palm Beach Drama Works and do the History Boys, and so he's got stuff. Oh, and he's still doing Matilda, that little piece.
It's so good because all these shows just keep going. He's got all these different things to bounce around to. That's pretty great. Yeah. Do you ever want to move to England?
We talk about it. It's certainly possible. It might happen.
It seems like you'd be so happy there. I don't know why. It's very presumptuous of me.
No, I loved living in England. And my husband has been living in my country for...
Right, that's kind of what I was thinking.
Almost 20 years. And I loved my time living over there. And it is entirely possible.
And you're not retiring to sit around the house like many people dream to do one day.
Yeah, no. And I'm not retiring. I mean, I'll be here one semester a year, and then I'll be doing other things, and probably still some teaching, but not as much. And yeah, it's, to me, what it feels like is there's this lovely phrase which I really like, which I'm 60 now, and I think Jane Fonda actually, it was the first time I read this, was reading her memoir, talking about the idea of the last third of life beginning at 60, and I've done a lot of thinking about what do I want this last third to look like. The second third, not all of it, but a lot of it has been my time here, which was, very, very satisfying. And I'm talking about it like it's over, and it's not, but it's shifting and changing.
Sure.
And, it's just, it's time to move into a different phase.
That's great. That's really great.
And the world is still very big, and Ben and I have a lot of ideas also about traveling and things like that.
Anything on your hit list that's like, got to do this?
Australia and New Zealand is...
Yeah, that's on mine too.
First big one.
What makes you want to go there? I almost can't describe it, and you know more about it than I do, I'm sure.
We know quite a few people from Australia, mostly people that we've met through work,
Right.
other voice teachers and actors and people, and things that we've heard are just very compelling. And people talk about New Zealand as being one of the most physically stunning places on the face of the earth.
Yeah.
And
Amazing.
culturally, I'm fascinated by both places and their relationship to the indigenous cultures there. And so there are a ton of reasons. But what we
Right.
have to do that's not so easy is find like a month
Yeah.
where because it's a very long plane ride.
Right.
And once we get there, we need to have time to stay there, which
Yeah, that's
might not be
true.
so easy.
You can't just go there for the weekend. Not
No,
at all.
would not
And spend
work.
the weekend getting there and back. One thing that I have been thinking about lately when I was thinking about talking to you was, what have you noticed as any changing trends in the student body over your time here?
That's an interesting question.
Because, the classes, kind of fit in their little categories, and somehow
Yeah.
you get a tone over the group. But I feel like, if there's any kind of...
Yeah.
in 2 decades.
One thing that is very different is students are younger, literally younger. When I was first here, there were more people who were returning students. And now there are still a few here and there, but it's more unusual. So
Fresh out of high school.
yeah,
Mostly now.
Yeah, and there were more students, people who would perhaps have gotten a degree elsewhere and then decided that they wanted to come here and train as an actor and be 24, 25, 26, 27 when they began.
Right.
And like Quinn, that was Quinn's situation. And you, of course. And yeah, and so people in the directing program, and
Right.
we'll still see it occasionally in the directing program, but there was much more of that. And
But now they're
that's-
freshman directors.
Now they're freshman directors.
So the
that's right.
times they are changing.
That's right, indeed. So that's a big change. What else do I see as changes? There are changes. I don't know. I hesitate to make generalizations, though.
Sure. But I think anything that you see in the students here is also a reflection
Yeah,
of just
yeah.
the generation in
Well,
general.
and I think it's kind of what you were saying earlier. We are in the internet era. We are in
the beginning of something new that we don't
Yeah.
understand at all.
And
That's what I
when
think.
I was here, the faculty, when I first arrived, the faculty didn't have computers. We didn't have email addresses. None of that existed. I remember that when I came back from England in 1995 to begin my job in late summer, I turned on the television. I hadn't seen American television in a long time, and all of a sudden there was this thing. I had no idea what it was. It said www dot something or other. I was like, what the hell is that? So, so that's a huge change. And
How does it affect the student life at this school? Like, how is it different to be a
I
student
have
here,
to
do you
tell
think?
them that they can't use their phone or their iPod pad thing, whatever, in Shakespeare class.
I'm not going to fix that.
I know you're
I'm
not.
leaving
I
it.
know. I didn't think you would. I didn't think you would be that kind to me, Rob. You can't look at the text on a screen.
Right.
You need a piece of paper and a pencil.
Right. Because it really hasn't, in most places, I work at a school now in High Point, and technology helps us do so many
Yeah.
things. But in
Yeah.
drama school, there's some stuff
Yeah,
that's
there's-
beneficial. The research that you're able to do is amazing, and there's some things, but for
Absolutely.
the most part, it doesn't, most of the raw stuff that you teach in class or that you do in class isn't affected by technology.
In my personal classes, it's not affected at all.
Right.
In my field, however, what Ben does and what Robin Christian McNair now and Anne-Louise Wolfe this year, what dialect coaching, that world really has changed and been hugely informed by technology, I think, in a good way.
Other than disbursement of samples, how is it affected?
Ben sends notes to people in MP3 form, so they hear him making the correction and talking about what it is. It's very, very clear.
And they can listen to those on the subway on the way to rehearsal.
Exactly. So that's an area. Anne Louise has an electronic version of the Longman Pronunciation Dictionary that she uses. So there are ways in which that's helpful. And there's some cool interactive Shakespeare apps and things like that. But to me,
you're wary.
Well, no, I'm not wary. They're amusing and interesting, and if I can use them as a way to get somebody interested or as a way to point up something that we're discussing, great. But it's not the thing.
Right.
It's not the experience. It's not the encounter with the language. It's not the encounter with yourself and your voice and in your body.
At the beginning of Shakespeare class, you always say, at least you always say, and I always take you at your word, is that if you want to discuss the authorship question, you're welcome to make an appointment with you and discuss it with you in private, but it's not to be used class time for.
And I actually don't say that anymore.
You don't?
Because a few years ago when the movie Anonymous came out, there was a big...
I was here. That was the year I was here.
So do you remember that I sent
the second year, I think.
sent out a chapter from Bill Bryson's biography of Shakespeare for everybody to read?
I still have it.
So, I now spend a little more time
in class talking
about that. Yeah.
Interesting.
Yeah.
Did you find before that people would make that appointment?
Nobody ever has.
No? You made the offer and they were like, yeah, I don't want to do that.
No.
I don't want to sit in the room with her and have that discussion.
No.
Because I'm not prepared. And I know I'm not prepared and it would just be sad.
And there are some very great and gifted people who will argue that William Shakespeare is not the author of the plays of William Shakespeare. And I understand that. And those people and I are at a point of disagreement.
Right. Like you're correct and they're not. That's how I feel about it. You don't have to say that, being one of those two groups.
I look at the evidence, and just to take one example, nobody worried about whether or not William Shakespeare wrote the plays of William Shakespeare for 200 years after his death.
Right. And then all of a sudden,
and then we started to worry about it. And
right. One of the things you said once in class that I don't know why it always stuck with me, it's just such a profound thought. And you said the thing that offended you most about the idea of people thinking that was that the big argument is no one person could have done all of that great stuff.
Yeah.
And what a sad place to start an argument from.
Yeah. That either no one person could have done all of that, or the idea, and I remember a Shakespeare professor that I had when I was in college at NYU, who was a terrific Shakespeare scholar. And I remember him saying that the thing that offended him about the argument was that it was essentially an elitist argument saying somebody like that, somebody with that level of education couldn't have done this.
Right.
And that really stuck with me.
Yeah.
And the more I read around and the more I look at it, the more I read around and the more that I learn, the more I realize that Shakespeare's education was quite good for the time, most likely.
Right.
And no, he didn't go on to university like Marlowe, but we have lots of people. I mean, the example that I use now, I don't know if I used this when you were in class, but is that Steve Jobs was born the same year I was born.
Right.
Right? Steve Jobs, Bill Gates, and I were all born in 1954. And those two guys didn't finish college. And it's kind of like saying Steve Jobs in 500 years, people saying, well, he couldn't have invented all that stuff and done, and I mean, the man changed the world.
Right.
And he had sort of one official semester of college and then sat in on some classes.
Right.
And then went in the garage with Steve and they came out with,
Yeah.
So that's kind of the argument.
No, totally.
That because I went to college, I should be the person to be able to change. There's something a little...
That's why I went to the school, was because I felt like the argument being made by this place was both by the faculty that it employed, the students that it accepted, and the way that the classes were structured said something about what they believed about education.
Right.
And it was about an experience and life, and an experience in life. And it's not just about a piece of paper or the title on the place. Most people don't even know this place exists. And it produces some of the most spectacular people who change the world all the time. I graduated in the lowest fifth of my graduating high school class. Not looking like someone who's going to do anything but just burn out and be forgotten about, but just because it didn't suit me.
Exactly.
And this place did. And I think you make a good point.
And you were able to blossom here.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
Well, thanks for talking to me, Mary.
You're very welcome,
this was
Rob.
Really great. I had a good
Thanks
time.
for inviting me. It was fun.
Well, that is going to bring this episode to a close. What a lovely, lovely woman she is. I adore her. She's a dear friend and colleague. Stay tuned for more, and be sure to give to the Bandits on the Run Kickstarter.
So I've been reading about nameless things. Don't ask me what they are.